Ladies and gentlemen, we are about to begin our session, book launch of Daddy's Boy by Shandana Minaz. The speaker is the author herself, Shandana, and the moderator, Framji Minwala, since he has two flat tires and he's stuck on the road. Shandana's husband, Umar Yusuf.
Imran.
Sorry, I'm so sorry. Imran Yusuf will join Shandana in the conversation. Thank you.
Hello? Yes, I was, Framji called me 30 seconds ago and said he's on, I think he said, where did he say? I don't know, some road with two flat tires. So he can't make it. I'm here. I suppose we should start with what was the inspiration for this book, Shandana?
Let's see. Well, I subscribe to a school of thought that Tabish Khair, who is a brilliant novelist, the author of How to Fight Islamist Terror from the Missionary Position, and Jihadi Jain mentioned recently, and that is thinking in stories. Human beings think in stories. A lot of people these days think that human beings think in facts and numbers, but actually we think in stories. So I suppose this book was my thinking in stories, and it's set in 2013 during election season in Karachi. I don't know if any of you remember, that was a particularly bloody year, 2013. Countrywide, but particularly pronounced during the elections. And I think what was happening in my head turned into this book. So
It's kind of a fish out of water story, you could say. A man from Lahore, not very versed in the ways of the world, comes to Karachi and is introduced to the city through his three very interesting uncles. Can you tell us more about that aspect, Lahore, Karachi aspect?
yes, so let me give you a little summary of the beginnings of the plot. A young man called Asfandiar Ikram, who's been brought up in Lahore, has never been to Karachi, raised by a single mother, believed that his father is dead, is woken up one morning by his beloved Ammi and told that his father died yesterday and he has to go to Karachi and do the succession certificate and whatever is necessary to get his inheritance. That's the first time he hears that his father actually has been alive all these years, and that's the first time he comes to Karachi. So it's a Punjabi in Karachi story. A Punjabi who's never been to Karachi, in Karachi. And the uncles that he meets are alcoholics, all three of them. There's a particular type of Karachi uncle, which I don't think you find in other parts of Pakistan. Yeah, so the three of them sort of function as Macbeth's three witches in the story. And yeah.
I think as a man, you've kind of you nailed a certain kind of Pakistani maleness in this character, in the protagonist. He's got mother issues, he's got fiancé issues, he's generally got the kind of afflictions which Pakistani men, in my observations and perhaps experiences, have. So, how did you do that?
Well, a lifetime of experience, Imran, I suppose. Yeah, we don't really participate in life, in physical life, as much as our menfolk do, but that doesn't mean that we don't observe. And in fact, perhaps our observation skills are honed because we don't participate as much as you do in the physical aspects of life. We have a lot of time to sit and watch. I would just like to clarify that this is not based on my husband.
What?
Yeah.
Who is it based on?
Yeah. This is not awkward at all.
Framji. Two flat tires. One I can deal with, but two.
Yeah. Well, why don't I read an extract from
Good
the book?
idea.
Yeah? Okay. So I'm going to start at the very beginning. Chapter 1. It was that rarest of Karachi deaths, expected. The pavements baked in the April heat, but a slow drizzle began as ICU staff removed tubes from Anis Navi's collapsed veins. A nurse unscrewed the catheter and wiped away the blood pooled in the creases of his neck. Another passed one hand lightly over his forehead, then pulled the sheet up to cover his face. Wheeling his body down to the morgue, the access corridor lined with empty stretchers, no one in sight but a flirting couple that disappeared at the first prospect of discovery, the orderlies heard the freak shower gather momentum and cursed, anticipating a risky journey home through standing water and the threat of arbitrary electrocution as the city's decrepit power distribution system collapsed. But by evening, as his body lay in the hospital till the check cleared and it could be released, the clouds had moved on. Miles away, they massed over the wind-beaten, dilapidated suburb where the patriarch had lived. A torrential downpour descended. Drops the size of pebbles beat on the windows of his fourth-floor flat, demanding to be let in. The three old men slouched around a dimly lit card table in what used to be the patriarch's living room, approved. He would have appreciated this, said one. He would have said the heavens themselves weep at my passing or something equally dramatic, said another. No, said the third. He would have said, well, I died with a full bladder and I had to take a leak somewhere. Their chuckles and chortles, sniggers and howls drowned out the sound of the key turning in the lock. A young man in a pink shirt and dark suit with thick black hair gelled off his forehead had entered and now stood by the door waiting to be invited further in. A small grey suitcase rested equally primly by his side. But the old men around their table did not notice him till he cleared his throat politely during a lull in the laughter. He met their eyes, pointedly not looking down at the bottles or glasses on the table between them. Assalamu alaikum, the visitor said. It's a ghost. Trust him to come back 40 years younger. You must be Esfandiar. The third rose and urged the youth forward with an outstretched hand, lurching only slightly as he shook it, placing his other hand on Esfandiar's face and leaning into it to steady himself. My God, you look exactly like your father. I'll take your word for it. Don't take something that means nothing to him, you fool. Take his watch. And that's the beginning of the story.
So immediately you've got the three older men, the younger man who we follow, and you've also obviously got the city. You have lived in this city your whole life.
That's true.
There's been a fair amount of writing about the city in recent years. This festival itself is, I think, 8 years old now. What do you think about this focus on Karachi, if we can call it that?
I think that it's become very sexy to write about Karachi. I think what happened after 9/11 was a sudden influx of Pakistanis who'd left the country and moved to what they thought would be greener pastures, suddenly realizing that the pastures were not quite as green as they thought. So unko tipak ke wapas aana pada. And the writing they produced has been written from that perspective. And I think there's a difference between the evolution of that strand of storytelling and the strand of storytelling that came out of people who've lived here and who've continued to tell stories.
So post-Trump, we can look forward to more new arrivals.
Yeah, post-Trump, I think I actually, America finds itself in the same situation we're in often, which is that you can't satirize some of the things that happen. But you know, I think the idea of Pakistani masculinity is something that I examine in the book. I'm now going to act like Framji myself. So yeah, the idea of Pakistani masculinity, you've written about this yourself in plays in terms of cricket, right?
People have come here to hear you.
Yeah, but your plays are more interesting. So Imran is the author of a brilliant play called Stumped, which is about the evolution of Pakistani masculinity through cricket. And I think one thing that went into this book was we were simultaneously working on different things. I write novels, he writes plays. So you can imagine the conversation around the lunch table has a lot to do with writing in different forms. And I think some of what he was working on bled into what I was working on, and hopefully some of what I was working on bled into what he was working on. And yeah, so it is a sort of about Pakistani masculinity and how it's changed from the generation before and the generation now. I think the idea of what it means to be a man has changed. And again, we have a more than vested interest in what it means to be a Pakistani man.
Speaking of that kind of area, there is a scene or two in this which gets a bit racy.
Apparently, I've heard the word racy used for what is basically a practical human function.
But there are under 15s in the audience.
Yes, there's
I
sexy bits
spot.
in this book.
So I'm just wondering, addressing you purely as a writer in terms of the craft, having never attempted such a scene before myself, maybe others in the audience have. What is that like to do? Is it more difficult than other passages, chapters?
It was very difficult when I was younger. It was very difficult to write sexy bits when I was younger because when you're young, you care more what people think, and obviously you think my mother's going to read this. And my mother's Catholic, so it's a bit complicated. But I think age brings you, if not wisdom, a certain kind of maturity. And my mother knows that sex exists, otherwise I would not be here. So once
Good
that
point.
happened, everything was fine.
So the book was published by HarperCollins India. Your
Yes.
book before that was Hachette India, and before that, Rowley Books India. You have recently established with me a publishing house in
I
Pakistan.
have, yes. We have.
Interestingly, there's a rumor going around the festival that I'm very wealthy, and I'm bankrolling this publishing house with millions. But that's another point. We'll discuss in the car later. But so, having been published in India and published to reasonable acclaim, and you've had, I think, pretty good experiences with those publishers by and large. What prompted you to set up a Pakistani publishing house?
Because nobody in Pakistan publishes English language fiction, hasn't been doing it for a very long time, and I always wanted to be published in Pakistan, and I was unable to find a publisher. And I think that it's time to fill that gap in the market. I
Fair
think that
enough.
we need to support our indigenous writers, if I may use that term.
I think that I'll put myself out of my misery here, and since
doing
we
a really
only
good
have a
job.
half an hour session, I think we're about 15 minutes through, so we could perhaps open it up to the floor.
I think that's a great idea.
So, any questions?
Could we have a mic for... Yes, I can, but perhaps people at the back.
Hello.
will also- Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
I have to confess to not knowing your work until yesterday when I looked in the bookshop and I found a lovely children's book which I bought and started to read, and I said I must come and hear your talk today. And I just wondered, the children's book is wonderfully funny. Is this a comic novel as well? And if it is, I mean, what do you think of the idea of the comic novel taking root in Pakistan?
Well, I think that the comedy is natural to Pakistanis because comedy and tragedy go hand in hand. And so that's the state that we exist in. I would say this is a comic novel, but it's a comic novel bookended by death because comedy actually for me has always been very dark. We don't know why people laugh. And I think one of the reasons why I'm constantly creating comedy in some form or the other is because I want to know why we laugh. There are so many theories. It's the human body's response to danger, it's amusement. But we don't know really why we laugh. And yeah. I don't consider myself a comic novelist. I consider myself a novelist. Occasionally, I happen to be funny. I do think that a lot of my comedy also could be classed as an inappropriate response. Anybody else?
Hi, everyone. Hi, Shazana.
Hello. Weren't you in school with me when we were like
Something
12?
like that.
Yeah.
Something like that. I don't want to go and talk about the numbers that will give your age away. So why a publishing house? Were the ones here in Pakistan not allowing you to write the way you wanted to write? Or was it just more of a, I'm an actor, I should be a director too?
Well,
How about
when I
that?
first approached a Pakistani publishing house, I was 22, and they said, we don't publish fiction, but why don't you ghostwrite this story for this nice society lady? I said, no, thank you. And I tried for a couple of years to find publishers in Pakistan. I was turned down by everybody. And it was only after looking very hard in Pakistan that I got very sad, and I sent my manuscript to an Indian publisher who immediately said, yes, please. And that was the first time a bell went off in my brain, and I learned that I wasn't being rejected because my work wasn't good enough. I was being rejected for other reasons. And yeah, I think that stories are the most important thing that a society needs to learn. And this is something that we can learn from religion, for instance. Our texts across religions are basically stories. That's how human beings process life. And one side effect of fundamentalism is the shutting down of storytelling and the stoppering of the craft and the art of storytelling, which also stops thought. So when you say you have no publishing here and you're not publishing, you're not just saying that you're not running a business, you're also saying that you're throttling the imagination and the evolution of a society. And I think those things are important.
Since I really enjoyed your last children's book, are you planning to write another one?
I am planning to write another one. I have 3 children, and 2 of them are very adamant that I drop this whole adult fiction nonsense and just focus on what really matters, which is writing for children. And I kind of agree with them, but it's going to take me a little while.
Can I just come in here and ask how you managed to, I mean, there's 2 books out in the last 2 years, plus a publishing house which has a book out in itself. So just as we were leaving the house an hour ago, you were putting the baby's apple stew together and organizing this, that, and everything else. And you said to me as we slammed the door and rushed out, I bet Hemingway didn't have to deal with this shit. And so...
Oh, I
What-
also then said didn't Hemingway blow his brains out?
Yeah, then you added that.
Yeah, multitasking is not rocket science. I suppose rocket science involves multitasking, though. The point is that you can do many things at once. And yeah.
I mean, there might be some younger writers out there or aspiring writers, and they think, oh, I've got a day job, or I've got this, I just don't have time to write. Do you have much patience for that?
No, I don't have any patience for the idea of writing as some sort of noble pursuit, to something that you have to do to the exclusion of everything else, because the creation of anything is based on experience. If you don't experience life, if you don't live life, what are you going to write about? And so people who lock themselves in a room and don't actually do anything or quit their job so they can write, I mean, I wish you luck. I don't know what you're going to write, because if you don't feed anything into the machine, what's going to come out the other end? But
Assalamu alaikum. I just wanted to ask that, you were rejected for your novel. Did you face
for
any,
many things, ma'am.
Did you face any problems when you have to establish your publishing house?
Well, we've just started, and yeah, we're facing a lot of issues. For instance, we don't actually know how books are printed. So our first book has printing flaws. So we have to, over the next year, learn a lot more about this craft. And because there aren't that many publishing houses here, the printing industry is in terrible state. And books in Pakistan are still bound by hand, wo jo printing hoti hai. So people who work on these books actually lose their fingers and their thumbs, and there's no labor regulation. So we would also like to establish businesses along with ethical practices. So that's going to take a long time to, master.
Yeah. So I'm just curious, as a writer, there's a lot of experiences and a lot of emotion that you probably want to talk about in your books. And then there's also something that is not going to sell because of whatever reason it might be. How do you draw a balance between what you want to write and what you're passionate about and what's going to actually sell in the market or what's in demand, what people want to read about? Yeah.
So I think your question is based on the premise that a writer tries to write a book that will sell. That is the primary. Am I understanding you correctly?
A writer wants to write about what they've been through.
No, I mean, that's not true necessarily. It depends on what you write.
Sure, but a lot of it is, I'm supposing, based on personal experience or something that has hit off with you that has made you want to write about it, right?
No, writing is not necessarily a response to trauma either. Just try to think of writing as a kind of storytelling, and I'm happy with that definition.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm a big fan. I think I told you yesterday. My question is about your publishing house. Do you think it would be maybe alongside with physical books go into e-publishing, or would that be too hard to enforce?
We have done a Kindle edition of our first book. The problem with the Pakistani market is that people don't read on e-readers. And there are practical problems that go along with it. So for instance, you can't use a Pakistani debit card online to buy, you can't buy stuff on Amazon with a Pakistani debit card. And even if you have a Pakistani credit card, it's really hard. So there are all sorts of issues that go along with that. And I know that there are similar things happening in India where smaller presses are trying to move online and are providing certain content for a very limited rate. So we're exploring everything, but we have to learn how to work within what we have. So hopefully we'll learn, but it's going to take us a while. Did you? That's great. Well, we should talk about it afterwards, and maybe you can help us out with some tips on how to stalk.
Are there any other questions? No.
No, sorry, we just have one. Did you raise your hand?
Over there. We have.
Yeah, that would be
Is
good.
it a question?
Hi, Shandana and Imran. I also have
Hi.
to apologize. I've been meaning to read the book, and my hands are full with this and
I can see that.
teaching as well. But I was just curious. I mean, in the process of writing a book as a Karachiite, how did you, or did you attempt to avoid the sort of cliched Lahore versus Karachi? You know, what was the creative process in attempting to sidestep falling into those cliches, but still writing from the perspective of a Lahori in Karachi?
Okay, again, I find the assumption behind that just a tiny bit problematic because it implies that the creation of a novel is is simply a craft issue, right? So you have these building blocks and you're building a novel. But there are actually several strands that work simultaneously. So there's your craft, there's your art, and there's your thought. And all three of those in alignment, and again, I think I'm summarizing Tabish Khair, that is how novel writing happens. So it's not as if you sit down with a whole bunch of little things and say, this goes here, and this goes here, and this goes here, like you're creating a Lego construction. What you do is you try, if you're lucky, to access a story completely. And these processes of sidestepping cliches happen automatically and organically. And if you are writing and being conscious that this is, I must avoid this, I must avoid that, then I'm not really sure that that is
But
writing as I understand it.
There might be something you sidestep. Obviously, in an environment like this, did you censor yourself writing this book? Was there a point with the pen, and I know you write by hand, where you paused and you said, I'm not sure I can get away with this? Has there ever been anything in any time you self-centered writing?
Yeah, I would be lying as a Pakistani if I said I didn't self-censor. I have yet to meet a Pakistani who doesn't self-censor on some level. But I didn't self-censor in this book in the way that one would think I did. I self-censored in the extent that it was such a harrowing book to write. I mean, this is a comic novel, but it's a comic novel bookended by death. And my characters do not find redemption in any of my work, actually. Even the children's book ends on a cliffhanger, which is why I should probably write a sequel. But yeah, it was a harrowing book to write. So I self-censored in terms of I think I stopped, I didn't go as deep as I could have because I wanted to still be able to come out the other end.
Having written a harrowing book, did you experience any catharsis at the end?
Oh yeah, I felt much better afterwards. I think once a story chooses you, then it, for me anyway, I'm haunted by it until I'm able to release it, and then I can move on to the next one. There's somebody in the back. Could we get them a mic, please?
Can I please? Okay, being an experienced Pakistani female author, is there any recommendation like of do's and don'ts you want to pass on to the newcomers?
Yes, I think the first thing is don't take any nonsense from anyone. If but it's true because as a female novelist, you will often, what happens here, and not just in terms of reception, in the way you're treated, but in the way you're reviewed, is that people will look at the work of male novelists, even if it is not, you know, very good, and they will treat it with this respect. Whereas people look at the work of female novelists, and if it's sophisticated writing, are unable to see it as experimentation with craft, but will see it as a failure of writing. As in, the mind cannot expand to consider that a woman can attempt to experiment with form or genre, right?
They have said time's up, but someone really wanted to ask a question, so perhaps just very quickly.
One last question back
Thanks.
there.
Just wondering, what's the role of research in your writing? I've heard some writers say that they research their plots, characters, settings a great deal. So I was wondering
I think
how
that
much
varies
research
from,
goes into your writing.
that varies from character to character. I don't do a lot of research. But for instance, I have lived in Karachi most of my life, and I have family in Lahore, and I've lived in Lahore when I was younger. So I didn't need to research. But perhaps somebody who was setting their book in a place or writing about something that they don't have immediate knowledge of would then need to have a factual basis. I think our time is up, so we're going to wrap up. But for those of you who came, thank you very much. And please do go and buy this book. And more important than buying this book, please buy Breakups, which is the book that she's holding, which is from the first title from our indie press. It's at Liberty Books.
Thank you, Chandana.
Ladies and gentlemen, the next session in this hall is Sheikh Ayaz, Sindh sung through him. एक मिनट यहाँ से